So that's how I got here. But how did I get here? And to answer that question, I'm going to have to tell you the story of how I became the secret Tory. And that's a story as old as time. One day, you're running a gym in North London with a couple of ex-gangsters, and the next, Tory MPs are reading out your tweets on the BBC. Civil servants are trying to unmask you in the corridors of Westminster, and every single interaction you have with your dad ends with him telling you to check your bins for Daily Mail journalists. Now, it started for me at the time of that thing whose name I've forgotten, but it was a unilateral decision to leave a mutually beneficial union of our European neighbours that was engineered by vested interests and disaster capitalists who used emotive propaganda and illegal data harvesting techniques to sell us lie upon lie upon lie upon lie about how the country would be more prosperous if we voluntarily imposed trade sanctions on ourselves. Brexit. It was Brexit. And there was this fella in the middle of it all called Mark Francois, never off the TV, the pint-sized patriot, obsessed with armies. There's loads I could tell you about him, but the most instructive thing I can tell you about Mark is that during the expenses scandal, when politicians of every stripe were not only flipping and furnishing their second homes, but also using taxpayers' money to pay for their horses' stables and their ducks' houses too, Mark was filing expenses claims for Wall Soleros, Pepper Army hot packs, and Bombay Bad Boy pot noodles. That gives you a measure of the man. So it's the height of Brexit. Francois in the middle of it all, and I'm in my gym doing my squats, you know, never skip leg day, people. And I decide to alleviate the boredom of listening to my business partner, Steve, berating our metropolitan clients about how the moon landings never happened by pretending to be him. Mark Francois, not Steve Michaels. Steve's got 7 kids, 2 cats and a snake, and used to be a professional henchman. Mark was in the Territorial Army Catering Corps and looks a lot like the cartoon character Penfold. But yeah, I just pretended to be him. I imagined his life. I set up a Twitter account, called it Mark Ne Francois Pas, because he hates French people. And I just began tweeting his day-to-day life. I said he lived in a 5-bed detached house in Wickford with a mock Tudor carport. Said that every lunchtime he'd do 10 respectful push-ups at the Bomber Command War Memorial. I said after a hard day's legislating, he'd drive a lap of the M25 in his ice-white Range Rover Evoque S with appearance package. And I said at the end of every day, he'd put a pork pie on his patio doorstep in honour of the unknown soldier before playing the last post on his kazoo. So you can imagine my surprise when the Labour leader of Basildon Council got in touch saying Mark is absolutely obsessed with your account and is demanding to know how you know so much about him. For clarity, I was saying Mark's breakfast was a bowl of sugar puffs made with a can of Monster. But, you know, it went well. It went really well. I got 5,000 followers, 10,000 followers, 20,000. Then the pandemic happened, and suddenly I was just locked in my flat with nothing better to do than pretend to be a middle-aged paintball enthusiast who claimed to have fought and died in over 2 world wars and spent his weekends fly-tipping with Ian Botham before hitting the Toby Carveries with James May. And that's when things began to get weird, because when you're in too deep, when you're trying to think like a Tory MP all the time, you start to act like them. And I noticed it with small things at first. Like I began to blame vulnerable minorities for problems I'd demonstrably caused myself. So I was blaming disabled people when I lost my car keys. I was blaming trans people when my dishwasher was incorrectly stacked. I was blaming refugees when I took the bins out on the wrong day. But it was when I found myself shitting in my local river in order to save money for Thames Water shareholders that I realised I was in too deep. Not the river, I was babbing off the edge. No, I realised I got what is known as Stockholm Syndrome. That's the proposed condition where detainees start to feel a psychological bond with their captors. Although, as I was tweeting from a top-floor council flat during a pandemic, mine was more accurately known as Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah. But, you know, it went well, really well, so well that I got a book deal. And so in hindsight, I can see it was kind of inevitable that Mark then got arrested for something really, really grim. And I decided I had to stop humanising him by putting good jokes in his mouth. So, after a bit of experimenting with Michael Gove, I'm sure I'm not the first young man who said that, I segued, I sashayed, I transformed into the secret Tory. Now, the secret Tory was a composite Tory MP who was constantly lobbying, lying, leaking, bullying, briefing, backstabbing, and was such a compellingly believable piece of shit, people began to think they were real. Bev Turner from GB News got in touch asking if I'd like to be a regular guest on her anti-vax conspiracy show. Newsnight editors got in touch asking if I had any revelations about Partygate I'd like to give up over my colleagues. I even began to get regular death threats. And it's difficult to know what was more alarming. The fact people are so stupid they're willing to threaten to kill an imaginary MP, or the fact that the warnings from my dad telling me to check my bins for Daily Mail journalists were now happening daily. Now, here's another thing about me. I'm an ultramarathon runner. You kind of know this. I've just run here. I've run 50 ultramarathons. I've run 110 miles without stopping before, 36 hours on my feet, 27,000 feet of climbing. That one's more than Everest. And not only is that an excellent thing to keep reminding people of for no reason whatsoever, it's also a great way of preparing yourself for any eventuality life might throw at you. When you know you can run for 36 hours without stopping, there's very little adversity you encounter in your life which seems as overwhelming as it did before. Until that is, last year, when I was informed by several separate sources that the worst person in the country, the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, had tasked the Cabinet Office with finding out who I was. Now, I don't know about you, I don't, but it just occurred to me that, you know, with stratospheric food bank use, record inflation, house building at a standstill, the NHS broken, judicial system decimated, school roofs falling down, shit in the rivers, not all of it mine, 800 closed libraries, 1,000 closed shore starts, and billions upon billions upon billions upon billions blown on test, trace, cronies, fraud, the Tories might have better things to do with their times than unmasking the identity of a ropey-looking fella now living in a remote valley in Carmarthenshire. And you'd be wrong. But I knew what I had to do, because I'd seen what these people do, how they operate. If something's about to break about you, you need to get ahead of the story. You need to seize the initiative yourself. So that's what I did. I got ahead of the story. I was going to reveal my identity first. And I did this in the week Ellie was due to give birth to our second child, under the impression no normal person would give a toss who I was. I was wrong. I appeared in every national newspaper. I was the BBC's #1 trending story. I got cut off on the lunchtime news for slagging off the Tories. I started getting recognised in my local Tesco's. Lee Anderson likened me to the Tiger King. I started, you know, it all happened. And it's, yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, it was very overwhelming. And I'll level with you. It wasn't quite the lead up to our home birth we'd been anticipating. And things were compounded one hot June afternoon when I went outside with the bins on the right day. And I found going through them a Daily Mail journalist. It's difficult to know what I was more angry about. The fact that this expletive fucking wanker from this race-baiting, Hitler-supporting scumrag had invaded the sanctuary of our house only hours before Ellie was due to give birth, or that Dad had been right. The rest, as they say, is history. I've written some books now. Here I am, and we're here to celebrate the tragedy of the Tories, which is good idea. A 5-act Shakespeare play written in iambic pentameter, apart from the Lee Anderson bits. Five acts for 5 prime ministers, and we're really lucky now to have some of the UK's best actors who are going to perform 2 short scenes from it. I'm going to hand over to them. Let's go for it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming.